All right. Hello, everyone. Let's make sure the transcript is operating. Yes, very good. And can everyone see and hear me properly? Excellent. Okay, so today is kind of a fun one. We're going to talk about mediumship and ghost hunting. So, kind of getting back to I guess some of what the psychical researchers were interested in. One sort of recurring theme here is that where the parapsychologists, people like the Rhines and those working in the same vein, right, they tried to avoid, among other things, anything to do with life after death, questions concerning life after death. But the psychical researchers studied people who claimed to be able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. Um, And so that's kind of what we're talking about today. And then I've got a little bit at the end that's going to be dedicated toward some discussion of ghost hunting. So before I hopped on the Zoom meeting, I was actually watching a bunch of clips from Ghost Adventures on YouTube. I hadn't seen any before, but oh my, it is certainly an interesting show. I didn't watch an entire episode. I just found, how those YouTube channels put together lists like, oh, top 10. This, one was like top 10 most frightening voices captured on microphone or something. So. I'm missing a bit of the context, but a lot of that stuff, like searching for EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, or trying to capture orbs or ghostly apparitions on film or in infrared. We'll talk a little bit about the problems with using the tools that people like those that you see on those shows, such as Ghosts Adventures. Um, some of the problems associated with the tools and with the approach that they're using. One thing you're going to want to keep in mind throughout today's lecture, as with many of our previous ones, is this whole idea of naturalism, right? Metaphysical naturalism. I won't spend much more time on this because I've talked about it at length. But I think, as I've stated before, most physicalists are naturalists. Most naturalists are physicalists. Physicalism is a sort of substance monism where the only kind of thing that exists, the only stuff that exists, is the physical, natural stuff. I guess I should spell this out, right? I mean, I think that's why there's this very, close connection between these two ideas of naturalism and physicalism. I mean, physicalism comes from the Greek physis, which just means nature, right? So if you're a metaphysical naturalist, right, you believe that only natural things exist, no supernatural things like God, spirit, souls, etc. Um, Last time we contrasted this with the substance dualism of Rene Descartes, right? And recall, Descartes believes that there are two kinds of substances: res extensa, extended substance, that's matter, and then res cogitans, thinking substance, that's mind. I said a lot about this last time, so I don't think I need to go into too much depth, but Descartes is famously likened the body to a machine. So in that sense, Descartes is a materialist, but he's not just a materialist, right? The body is like a machine, an intricate machine, a natural machine, a machine made by God, the God of the philosophers, right? The God that Descartes seems to talk about in his work is a deistic God, right? One that doesn't necessarily interfere with the workings of the universe, but who created the universe, specified the rules by which everything operates, winds up the clockwork mechanism that is the universe and then lets it go, right? That's the God that Descartes and many other of his contemporary philosophers have in mind. So the body is this sort of natural machine, this machine made by God. Um, the mind is the soul, right? In fact, this is still, Descartes, 17th century. This is still when, or 17th or 18th. I'm not a dates person. Um, but you get within this period of philosophy, this sort of, uh, it's not really an equivocation because at this time, the notion of the mind pretty much was just analogous or equivalent to the soul. Um, as you get closer and closer to the 20th and then the 21st century, you start to see more of a distinction being made between these two things. And when people talk about the souls, they tend to talk about them as something that like akin to the notion of the soul that we find in the Abrahamic religions, and mind more natural. But for a long time, the mind and the soul were really the same thing. This is also incidentally why, as I pointed out in previous lectures, when Ernst Jentsch talks about psychical uncertainty, right? Psyche, that comes from the Greek for soul. He's not talking necessarily about what we today would think of as psychic stuff in the paranormal sense, right? He's talking about mental stuff, right? Same thing. So mind or the soul, mind, soul, same idea. And this idea of this soul, this immaterial entity that is essentially you, is much older than Descartes, right? We actually see a version of it as early as Plato. Plato has a tripartite soul, right? Talked about this last time as well, where we have the rational soul, which is kind of like the driver of a chariot. And the two horses pulling the chariot are the spirited soul and the appetitive soul. So the spirited soul, that's your passions, your emotions. Your appetitive soul is your basic appetites, your biological drives and urges. The job of the rational soul is to kind of keep these horses going ahead together at an even pace. They're also incidentally flying horses, and one is trying to go up, the other's trying to go down, right? The spirited soul is always trying to go up, the appetitive soul is trying to go down. The rational soul, the part of the soul with logos, with reason, with speech, etc., is trying to keep these horses level, pointed in the same direction, so that all the parts of soul are in harmony with one another, right? When Descartes talks about res cogitans, it's quite similar to Plato's rational soul in that the soul is what has reason. The soul is what thinks. It is the thinking substance, right? What on earth does any of this have to do with ghosts? Well, I'll first draw your attention to the etymology of the word ghost. I mentioned incidentally for your essay assignments, you don't want to be using a dictionary as a source. You want to be using it as a guide. Unless you're doing something like this, looking at the etymology of a word. In English, the word ghost can refer to the spirit of a deceased person. And indeed, there are reports of hauntings or encounters with ghosts that go back to antiquity because, even though we associate dualism, substance dualism with Descartes, mind-body dualism goes all the way back to Plato. Um, Another thing that Blackmore mentions in other chapters of this book that I'm drawing from, Consciousness and Introduction, is that children are kind of like natural born dualists. Very early on, children learn to look at the world either in terms of inanimate matter or of things that are alive. And the things that are alive, we tend to look at as things that have souls. It's related to the idea of animism, which we discussed when we covered Jentsch and Freud. Like if our animistic tendencies also cause us to look at certain elements of the world as if they were alive, but as Jentsch says, not just alive, alive in the same way that we are. So, right, in animistic traditions from around the world, sure, living creatures have souls, Humans have souls, animals have souls. Maybe plants have souls. Maybe particularly holy or sacred locations might have spirits associated with them, right? So it's no surprise that we would get ghost stories from ranging from the present back into antiquity from all around the world. And we say ghost now because now in English, ghost has this connotation of, the spirit of a deceased person, right? Ghost in English is cognate with the German word Geist. And this is interesting, right? German and English are both Germanic languages. They're like cousins, cousin languages. So we have a lot of words that are cognates of the same blood. That's what that means. If something is a cognate, it means basically that if two words are cognates, they're descendants of the same ancestor word. So these would have, Ghost and Geist would have descended from a word in Proto-Germanic, probably, which is an extinct language out of which English, German, and the other Germanic languages like Dutch, like the Scandinavian languages, all kind of grew out of, right? Now in German, ghost or Geist can mean ghost, like we mean when we say ghost in English, but it can also mean mind or spirit. And this reflects a usage of the word that is kind of no longer uh, happening in the English language. So, for example, you might have heard loan words from German like Zeitgeist, right? What is a Zeitgeist? Anybody know? Nobody's heard the word Zeitgeist? Okay, well, all right. Well, that's what I'm here for, I guess. Okay, so Sarah's heard it. That's good. Well, don't worry. I will tell you what it means. Um, Leo, good guess. Zeitgeist means spirit of the times. So Zeit means time, and Geist is ghost or spirit. So time ghost or time spirit. It's the spirit of the times, right? What's something that's part of the spirit of our times? Um, Well, a lot of people are active on social media. Like, I always find it weird when I see people out in public doing, Instagram stories or TikToks where they're just like, hey guys, I'm here teaching my class. Hey, what up? Click, post, I guess I'm a bit old, so whenever I see somebody doing that, I'm like, oh, that's weird. But I guess that's part of the spirit of the times, right? So that's a word where we see, one of the different uses of ghost as spirit. What other weird German words? Well, not to imply that German words are weird, but German words are interesting to me. I don't speak German, but I know a little bit of the vocabulary. Another interesting one is let's see, Geisteswissenschaften. Has anyone heard that one? I'm assuming not, if we're not too familiar with Zeitgeist. So, Geisteswissenschaften, if I'm getting that right, uh, are like mind sciences. So, psychology, cognitive sciences, right? So, there you see Geist referring to mind, right? And of course, Geist can also refer to spirits, like the poltergeist. So, I have on an upcoming slide poltergeist, which is a word I'm sure you've heard. If you're taking this course, surely we've heard the word poltergeist, yes? Or maybe you've heard of the movies? I think there was, I don't, or maybe there's only one. I'm not sure. Surely we've heard this word, though. It means noisy ghost. So poltergeist is a noisy ghost. In English, yeah. we kind of still have this, ghost can mean a spirit kind of thing. I'm not aware of um, any instance of ghost in English referring to mind, at least from the past couple of centuries. We say things like, "Oh, my old car, it's given up the ghost. Uh, It stopped working. It died, right? It's given up the ghost. The spirit has left." You do see this in like Charles Dickens, for example, A Christmas Carol, right? Who is Scrooge visited by? Ebenezer Scrooge. He's visited by a number of supernatural figures. It's interesting, this is a Christmas story and it's got ghosts in it. Um, Interesting. But who's visiting Ebenezer Scrooge? If you haven't read it, I don't blame you. Dickens is so dry. His prose is so dry. I'm not a fan. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, the ghosts of past, present, and future. That's right. Yeah, and that's right. His partner Marley. So here, Ghost has a couple of different meaning. So he's visited by the ghost of Marley, his old partner. So he's a dead person. So that's the ghost of a deceased person. And he says, "You're going to be visited by three spirits, Ebenezer Scrooge." And then he's visited by the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. These ghosts are not dead people. They are sort of like spiritual embodiments of the past, present, and future, right? They are um, well, a bit like the ghost of, I think it's the ghost of Christmas Present in that work is pretty much just Father Christmas, who's the British version of Santa Claus. It's not exactly the same as Santa Claus, but it's a sort of anthropomorphization of this of Christmas time, right? So, couple different ways we can understand that word. When it comes to the philosophical side of things, I mentioned this last time. Gilbert Ryle, uh, in his critique of this whole Cartesian dualism thing, remarked that there is no ghost in the machine. The body is not a machine. The mind is not a spirit. Dualism doesn't work, essentially. That's kind of why you don't really find very many substance dualists nowadays. But in any case, I think questions about ghosts aren't just interesting from, a paranormal researcher's perspective or that of a parapsychologist. I think that whether you believe in ghosts kind of serves as a litmus test about your metaphysical commitments, right? So if you believe in ghosts, and I'm not making any criticisms here, right? I realize that we have skeptics and believers in this class. So if you believe in ghosts, that might tell you something about your metaphysical commitments. You might be a substance dualist, right? Um, if you don't believe in ghosts, or if you are open-minded yet skeptical, you might be more of a metaphysical naturalist. Um, So whether or not you believe in ghosts tells you something that you may not realize about your wider worldview. I think that's interesting. It's funny when I teach my class on consciousness using Blackmore's book, I always start out with a room full of dualists. Most of the students, these classes, they're first year seminars, so they're generally no more than 30 students, and a good number of them will be dualists. And then as we move through the material, certain students abandon dualism in favor of, like identity theory or functionalism or something. I think that's interesting. But some students remain dualists, and that's fine. I'm not a dualist. I don't think it's a particularly um, good theory, but it is a very intuitively appealing one. But this also, might not just This might not tell you, or might not only be useful for telling you something about your worldview, um, in terms of what kind of metaphysical beliefs you're committed to. If we proved the existence of ghosts, that might show that materialism or physicalism is false. Either that or ghosts have a physical explanation, right? If there really are spirits of the deceased out there, and we can detect them with the tools of the ghost hunters or something, then that would suggest that it's not actually supernatural. It's a natural phenomenon yet to be explained. In other words, just an anomalous phenomenon, right? So maybe if we find ghosts, that either shows that physicalism is false, and we have to rethink what we think we know about the universe, or it would show us that we've discovered something new, and still we'd have to rethink what we know about the universe, right? But in this case, the second case, if we found out that there was some kind of natural explanation for ghosts, not as non-phenomena, but as some kind of natural explanation how a mind can exist independently of a body, that would be like explaining ghosts as natural phenomena. That would not as a non-phenomena. I guess what I have in mind is something like you know, um, something like the sorts of things you see on Star Trek sometimes. Um, Man, there are only 25 of you here today, and you're all, well, not all of you, but most of you are young folk. So I'm going to assume there's not too many people here that have seen any Star Trek. Anyone? Anybody watched any Star Trek? Where there's some kind of weird adventure of the week where somebody's mind becomes disembodied? Long time ago, Sarah says. Okay. Oh, Lena, excellent. I love that you love Star Trek. Excellent. You'll make an excellent philosopher if you love Star Trek. Casey, yes. Kaya, Forrest, aw. Holly's seen a lot. Oh yeah, Star Wars, I'm a Trekkie, but I also love Star Wars. But Star Wars has ghosts too. We can riff on both of these examples. In Star Wars, you can become a Force ghost, right? Obi-Wan gets struck down by Darth Vader, but he becomes one with the Force, and he's able to, appear to Luke Skywalker. I'm sorry if I'm spoiling Star Wars for anybody, but Obi-Wan Kenobi can appear to Luke Skywalker, tell him where, you got to go to the Dagobah system. That's where Master Yoda is, etc., etc. Um, in the Star Wars universe, that's not supernatural, right? That's because there is the Force, this energy field that surrounds and binds all living beings. And I guess when you become a Force ghost, that's kind of like becoming one with the universe, one with the Force, right? So in the Star Wars show, even though there are a lot of people like Han Solo looks at the Jedi as if it's some kind of ancient superstitious cult or something. If you're watching Andor, the most recent series, the second season finished a little while ago. I'm not quite finished it, but there are some interesting bits where Cassian Andor seems to be skeptical of the Force, right? It's looked upon with superstition, and yet within that universe it's not supernatural. Like it's just part of the universe. Star Trek is interesting because you'll have weird episodes where, somebody's mind gets turned into energy and floats around the spaceship and, has to basically, it's like a ghost hunting episode, right? Where I remember one episode of Star Trek Voyager where something happens with Commander Chakotay such that his mind, he becomes kind of like disembodied and he has to communicate to the crew like, "Help, I'm out here floating around. You need to get me back in my body." And he can take over computers, he can take over people and make them do things. to try to communicate what's going on, very much like a haunting or a possession, right? A colleague of mine, Phil Hoyak, who teaches philosophy and pop culture, and he always does Star Trek. He made a joke to me once, like, yeah, Star Trek is like the only sci-fi franchise that has like dualism and functionalism. And I said, yeah, you're right, because they're very metaphysically inconsistent, right? Like, I still love Star Trek, but it's like, yeah, so magic isn't real, but also your mind can leave your body and get stuck in a computer or something. Whoa, whoa, Anyway, that would be the sort of, if we were really able to show that something like that was possible, or that something like a Force Ghost from Star Wars was possible, well, that would start to make it look like this stuff is just part of the natural world, but it's just something we don't understand yet. I don't think that's where the evidence is going to take us, but it is a possibility, right? So we could talk about ghosts in lots of different ways. We could talk about ghost hunting, and we will. We could talk about stories of hauntings. We could review the casework of, I don't know, the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Who knows about them? Actually, I don't actually teach about them very much in this course, but I think they're worth a mention. Ah, okay, yeah. The Conjuring movies, that's right, as well as the Amityville Horror. Um, I think the Annabelle stuff. Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad that you're familiar with them. The Devil on Trial. I haven't seen that. That's a documentary, is it? Um, yeah, basically, Ed and Lorraine Warren were paranormal investigators. Ed was a sort of I'm not going to call him a ghost hunter, but working in the same vein as what you'll see on those sorts of shows. And Lorraine Warren was a medium, claimed to be a medium, and together they would investigate haunted locations. And they're kind of like the original, at least, in our epoch, the original ghost hunters, post spiritualist craze, right? Yeah, yeah, Belle. That's why I don't really talk about them. I don't really want to. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, because when you talk, I actually do believe the Warrens were grifters, essentially, like you say. I do think that. I do. I think they probably were con artists. Um, that's my opinion, personal opinion. Hope I don't get sued. Um, there's enough that you can go into a deep dive through the podcast, through the Wikipedia articles to see to see just, some of the questionable stuff that's gone on, the embellishment. Um, it's primarily just the way they would over embellish everything. They're very good storytellers. I'll put it that way. And that's why it irks me so much that whenever I go and see one of the movies based on one of their cases, it's like based on a true story. Well, it is based on a story that the Warrens told. That part's true. But the Warrens, I'll put it this way, the Warrens embellished their stories, their evidence about as much as the movies that are based on their work embellish their work. Um, so yeah, I'm sorry if you believe them. I think there are good reasons to be very skeptical of the work of the Warrens. But I guess what I'm doing is like if I do a whole lecture on the Warrens, like, am I platforming nonsense, right? I don't know. I don't know. Um, um, we will talk about searching for ghosts toward the end of the lecture. But what I really want to focus on today is mediumship, communicating with the dead. So, is there evidence that your mind, your soul, whatever it is, can survive your death? And is there any evidence that we could communicate with these entities? Let's take, as we usually do, a critical look. So we need to talk about the Fox sisters now. How did that all get started? How did spiritualism kick off? Well, it all happened in the mid 19th century, in 1848, started in a place called Hydesville, New York, where these two sisters, Kate and Margaretta, were basically it kind of started like they were playing a joke on their older sister. So there was another Fox sister, the oldest of the Fox sisters, I believe. And the two younger ones would make a joke where they reported hearing raps coming from the end of their bed. Oh, Leah, that's her name. I've got it right here in the slides. Wow, I'm so good at prepping that sometimes I forget how much I've prepped for a lecture. So yeah, they're pranking their older sister Leah, and they invent this code where they hear two taps or two raps for yes, one for no, or vice versa, something like that, claiming that they could use this system to communicate with the spirit of a dead man. This man had been allegedly buried underneath their house and was haunting the place. And so, if they heard certain numbers of raps, they could ask questions and then get an answer. It's a lot like you see on really some of these ghost hunting shows, right? Ghost hunters, ghost adventures. On a few of the clips I was watching earlier, in fact, they had these interesting little devices. I wasn't sure. Actually, it's a new device for me. I'm not sure what the deal is, but they are little balls that light up when they move. And the idea is they put these balls around and see if they move and light up. I guess because a ghost is affecting them, right? So the idea, and they're shouting questions into the darkness, in this haunted house, like, "Where? Tell us you're here. Will you tell us you're here, ghost?" And then maybe one of these balls moves and lights up, and it's like, okay, so that's taken as a yes. There's a ghost. Oh, are they just cat toys? Oh, I thought they were some kind of special device. That is amazing. That's amazing. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna get some of those for my cat, see if he likes them. And also amazing because yeah, well, I'm sure there are more professional versions. There's probably like a version you can get at the dollar store for your cat, and then there's the one you get on a ghost hunting website that costs you $100. I don't know. I'm sorry to be so cynical, but picked up a rock and throw it at a ghost. One of the clips I just saw was of a rock apparently being tossed out of nowhere. But who knows? It could have been somebody off camera just throwing it. That's the other thing. Um, okay, so kind of like that, they've got this mediumistic wrapping system for communicating with this. Word spread, and the Fox sisters become kind of famous, right? And they travel around the United States. They bring the bed with them. It's like that's their tool for communicating with this person. And they give these public demonstrations where apparently they're communicating with dead spirits. Right? And they got quite famous, and that was what sparked off the mediumship craze, the spiritualist craze of the 19th century. Yeah, throwing the rock again. I don't know. Again, this was just a clip. It wasn't the whole episode. I don't think I could. I'm sorry. I know that I look. I'm trying to be. I want to be open-minded. I want to not be one of those cynical skeptics. But I don't think I could make it through an entire episode of Ghost Adventures. I think I would just become angry. I can't make it through an entire episode of Finding Bigfoot for the same reasons, right? I'm just like, oh my God, it just makes me angry. So I try to be I am a skeptic. I try to be open-minded. I try not to be antagonistic, towards other people's deeply held beliefs, but I just can't with these ghost hunter shows, right? This clip, it was just they were like in a room, everything was green because infrared or whatever, and a rock falls down, and they're like, "Oh, dude, oh my God, bro, did you see that rock?" And then they start talking to the ghost again. Yeah, anyway, um, so. Um, there were people who were skeptical of the Fox sisters at first, but there were also a heck of a lot of believers. Um, yeah, yeah, Lena, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a kind of circularity. It's kind of circular reasoning going on. Yeah, ghosts can be found by these devices that I've invented. So if this device lights up, I'm right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Um, and as I'll say later toward the end. Um, the devices that these ghost hunters use are not, with the exception of, I mean, there are certain that are made specifically for looking for ghosts, but a lot of the tools that they use, like audio recordings for EVPs or EMF meters to detect electronic signals, these are not made for finding ghosts, right? These are not tools for that job. Um, There are other problems, but we'll get to those. So yeah, as I was saying, there were some skeptics, a lot of believers. The skeptics couldn't explain if the Fox sisters were frauds, how they were doing it. But in 1888, many years after they first rose to fame, they publicly confessed and they demonstrated that they'd been clicking their toe joints against the bed. That's how they got the raps or the tapping or knocking sounds. They would retract this confession, but the skeptics thought, well, if they've admitted it, then the matter is settled, right? Even if they would retract their confession, no, they admitted it. Why should we believe them, right? At the very least, if they carried on for years claiming to be able to communicate with the spirits of the dead, then confess that they were frauds, and then retract that, at the very least, you don't know what they believe. You don't know what they really believe. Um, so Jamal says, I think the ghost hunting show you like would be BuzzFeed Unsolved Supernatural. Having one of the two being a skeptic, I think really grounds the show. Yeah. I think actually, Jamal, I think I've seen the odd one of those. Um, Yeah, and if it's funny, I mean, that's why, if you watch this stuff, I mean, I'm not gonna dispute that it's good entertainment. I mean, these shows are incredibly popular. I've only mentioned a few, right? Again, Ghost Adventures is the one that you all seem to be most familiar with. There are others like Jamal says here, BuzzFeed Unsolved Supernatural. Ghost Hunters was kind of entertaining because their whole shtick was that they were plumbers by day, ghost hunters by night. So at the beginning of every show, they're pulling up in their roto rooter van and then getting into their ghost hunting van. And then they go and hunt for ghosts. I just think it's great. Like plumbers, ghost hunters. There was another one called Paranormal State, which was about a bunch of students from Penn State University who would go and do sort of parapsychological investigations. There was Living for the Dead, which, I mean, I watched the first episode and it was very entertaining. I think it's interesting to have a ghost hunting show that brings a little bit of diversity, right? Because these were all LGBTQ investigators. And interestingly, belief in certain paranormal phenomena is higher amongst certain segments of the population, including Not by a lot, but it does tend to be higher in women and in queer individuals. So I think that's interesting. And I think it would be interesting to try to explain why the belief levels are higher. That's not to say that straight men don't believe nonsense. I mean, all that alpha, beta, sigma stuff, that's like zodiacal signs for bros, right? So it's definitely not just women, it's definitely not just LGBTQ people that believe things that are wrong. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting example of a show that brings a kind of a bit of a fresh perspective. Yeah, yeah, Luigi's Mansion. That's a good one. This would have been like the early 2000s. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Fern and Bell. Yeah. The Alpha Beta Sigma stuff, it's astrology for dude bros. That's exactly what it is. It's like, oh, I'm such an alpha. And it's like, well, that's not really a thing. And if it was, then, calling yourself one doesn't make you one. But okay. Anyway, yeah, Lena, maybe it's like you say, women have been historically associated with witchcraft. Um, yeah, yeah, it could be a way to like witchcraft, I think, yes, witchcraft, women living outside of society with knowledge that the rest of society doesn't have. I'm not just talking about witches in the, like in like the Inquisition or in colonial America, like Salem, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about witches and wizards, like the shamanistic traditions from all over the world, where your witch, your wizard, your medicine man, your witch doctor, whatever, would probably be sort of an eccentric, maybe an outsider. In Europe, yes, women tended to be well, there's so many ways we can kind of look at this. And keep in mind, I'm not a historian, but the oracles in ancient Greece, right? They tended to be delivered by women. In Germanic paganism, um, a witch or a sorcerer, chances are would have been a woman or a queer individual. So, like in again, getting into the like the Old Norse stuff, which again, I'm no expert in, but a little bit of familiarity, if you were a seer, like a saver, a witch or a seer, chances are you were a woman, or if you were a man, you were definitely not the traditional, I hate to use the term, but alpha male. You were probably somebody who t today might be we would call LGBTQ, right? So maybe, yeah, it's like an outsider thing, right? This could make a really interesting essay topic, by the way. I'm like, it would be really cool. Yeah, yeah, Jamal, you're right. Like, and I used to not quite understand, right? I used to know a lot of like, well, I still do, but I have I have a lot of I have a lot of queer friends. None of them are very religious, but they know somebody who is maybe, and I always thought like I don't get it because they do not all religions, but in some religions, in certain branches of certain religions, they do persecute LGBTQ people quite a lot. And maybe I don't get that because I'm not religious, so I don't get the appeal, but you're right, maybe it could be like a reclamation of spirituality, right? A reappropriation of spirituality. Again, could make a really good essay topic. Um, Leo says maybe queer people tend to believe in the supernatural more because they are drawn to counterculture goth. Yeah, yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Like, because the queer community is quite countercultural. Countercultural with respect to traditional heteronormative culture, right? And so maybe, you kind of accumulate other countercultural bits from other areas, right? And yeah, like yeah, if you feel alienated from religion, maybe this is a way of reclaiming your spirituality, right? Yeah. Yeah, like Jamal says, okay, so they say there are a lot of queer people who are specifically a certain religion and not just spiritual. Yeah. I wonder, it would be interesting to see if there are different reasons why um, people from the queer community might opt for one religion or another specifically, or sort of general spirituality. I'm sure somebody's done some work on this. Like Jamal says, there's a PhD thesis somewhere here. Yeah, you're right. Um, yeah, or Bell, when the world isn't designed to your needs. So when you're not somebody who looks like me, right? It causes you to question things more. Yeah, like why is society this way? When you don't have the privilege, right? You know, um, you might you might try to build your own outlook. We all have worldviews, right? And if you're coming from a vastly different walk of life than, straight white males, um, I mean, chances are you're going to have a different worldview, aren't you? Right? And maybe part of building that world is this spirituality. It's really interesting. Holly says if you're trans, bisexual, or non-binary, maybe you're already used to being a dualist. Maybe not in the mental sense. I've actually talked about this question when it comes to theories of personal identity, right? Like, there are theories of personal identity that like animalism that say that what makes a person is not just your continuity of memory or the narrative of your life, but also the fact that you are an embodied whole animal, right? And I thought, well, if that's the case, then what does that mean for like trans people, right? That would mean, I guess, maybe when they transition, they're becoming the person that they are, if that makes like on a sort of animalistic view of the of personal identity in the self. Something interesting to think about, anyway. Boy, that was one heck of a digression, wasn't it? I think it's really cool when we go off. I mean, we're off topic, but it was still relevant to what we're discussing in that class, and maybe some of you got some ideas for your essay proposals. So, good digression, everybody. Good discussion too. That was really good. That's what I love about teaching. Um, so to get back on track, the Fox sisters confessed and then retracted their confession. Skeptics said, "Okay, well, they confessed, so at the very least, we don't know if their frauds are real. We don't know if they think they're frauds or if they're for real. And if the worst, they're definitely frauds. But believers continue to believe." And this is all regarded as the start of the spiritualist craze, which eventually spread to not only the rest of America, but into Europe. And this is what kicked off the beginnings of psychical research, right? And from there, parapsychology. So I guess everything reached its peak around the end of the 19th century. Spiritualism was never bigger than it was toward the end of the 19th century. We had spirit mediums in Europe, Great Britain, the United States. A lot of them would hold seances. A particular kind of seance would be called a table turning seance. So you have your medium and you have all of the people gathered around a table. Everyone wants to communicate with the dead. Everybody places their hands on the table and the table begins to move, right? The medium, um, the idea is it's the medium who's serving as a sort of conduit or communicator with the spirit. Uh, And when the spirit attempts to communicate with the medium, weird stuff starts happening. The tables move, other things in the room move. Indeed, seances took place in dark or dim rooms. People would report many of the same phenomena that you see depicted on these ghost hunting shows, right? Hearing voices, cold spots, right? That was something I noticed on the clip from Ghost Adventures that I was watching. People are walking through a reportedly haunted location, and they'll say, "Oh my God, I just got a chill," or "Oh, it's so cold over here," right? It's a cold spot. People would report the same things in these seances. Maybe feeling a touch, maybe seeing objects move without obviously being moved by anyone. Some mediums even oozed this weird grayish substance called ectoplasm, and that's where we get that idea from. So, you know, I haven't seen Ghostbusters, but I am aware of the ghosts that slimes you, right? That's from this idea of ectoplasm, which comes from the seances that were held in the Victorian period. One of these mediums, very famous medium, was from Italy. She was an orphan from Italy. Her name was Eusapia Palladino. She did a lot of work in Poland, which is where she kind of rose to fame. An interesting thing about Palladino is that um, I forget who it was, whether it was her husband or her father or her brother, but anyway, this family member of Palladino's ran a business. You'll never guess what kind of business he ran. Would you like to guess? I would love you to guess. Or you can go and look it up on the internet. It was a shop of some kind. What kind of shop? What kind of shop do you think it was? Costumes and furniture are good guesses, but yeah, basically it was a magic shop. A shop for illusionists and magicians and other entertainers. And you could get things like glow in the dark paint, um, um, sticks, black sticks painted black that you could use. You could have somebody in the dark moving objects with this stick, and it would look like an object is moving by itself because it's dark and you can't see the stick. Um, Spirit writing slate. So you might have seen there's an illusion that magicians do where they have two double-sided slates, basically tiny chalkboards, and they present them to you as if they are um, blank on both sides, and then they put them together, and then when they pull them apart, a message appears. This is sleight of hand. When the magician is doing that, what they're doing is just showing you the same side of the slate twice, but they're doing it in a way where it looks like they've turned the slate over. So they're keeping the bit that has the message written on it away from you at all times, even though it looks like they're showing you both sides of the slate. It's another prop that you could have got at this shop from Palladino's. I'm pretty sure it was her ex-husband, but someone's going to have to double check this for me. And she could do lots of interesting effects. She could levitate. She could levitate other objects. So what the Rhines would later call psychokinesis. Materialize extra limbs, move furniture. But she was caught cheating in 1895. Harry Houdini, also active as an illusionist around this time, was very skeptical of Palladino. He was also very skeptical of Daniel Dunglas Hume from Scotland. So that's why it looks like it's home, but it's pronounced Hume because he was from Scotland. And I guess the pronunciation conventions are a bit different over there. Um, so you had skeptics like Houdini, but a lot of people believed, and some even claimed that people like Palladino and Hume could genuinely perform these things under controlled conditions. Hume, by the way, was never really caught cheating. He also worked in well-lit rooms rather than dim rooms. There were claims that he could levitate himself, levitate heavy objects. He could handle hot coals. Again, materialize extra limbs. Right? These are all kinds of illusions that you would actually also see magicians or illusionists doing as well. Um, That's because, I mean, really, they're kind of the same thing. It's just that the magician doesn't tell you that they're doing it for real. Um, but there were a lot. I mean, this was the age of what we call parlor magic. So we're all familiar with magic. Magic is not really magic. There is no real magic. Magic is illusions, is effects, is sleight of hand for entertainment purposes. Who's been to a magic show? Like a real magic show? Not, oh, my little kid's got a birthday party and I got a magician coming over, but like a magic show. Jamal has, Kaya has. Belle's seen some hypnosis shows. I've seen one of those too, actually. It was very funny. Although, if that hypnotist did that show today, he'd be getting canceled. I'll tell you that. Lena as well. I had the privilege of seeing Penn and Teller. Oh, in Vegas, lucky. I saw Penn and Teller at Casino Rama, down in Barrie or Aurelia or wherever it is. And that was really cool because I knew it was all sleight of hand and I didn't care. And I genuinely felt like a little kid. I remember there was one trick that Teller did where, so if you don't know Penn and Teller, they're the pair, and Penn is the really tall guy. Um, yeah, Bell, yeah, you're right. They tell you this is not real, right? And sometimes they even tell you how they do the trick. Um, and Teller's the short guy who doesn't talk. Um, and Teller did one trick where he was reaching into an aquarium and pulling out like nothing, but producing coins and putting them into an audience member's hand. And then he took all of those coins and put them back in the tank. And when they when he released the coins, they became goldfish. And I was just like, whoa, like I feel like a little kid. It's real magic. Of course, I know it's not, but it was so cool, right? Lena, who did you see in Vegas? Oh yeah, the upside down water cup and yeah, that's one you can learn to do fairly easily. Jamal says they went to oh, there was one where there was birds. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how they do it. I guess because they use they use pigeons. They call them doves, but they're white pigeons. And pigeons um are pretty much a domestic bird. They're all around now because we don't use them anymore. But the pigeons that are all around our cities now are all descendants of old carrier pigeons, which are domestic birds. Maybe that's how they got the bird to behave. Um, oh, neat. Nice. I'm not familiar with him, but I'll have to check that out. Matt Franco. So it sounds like what everybody is most familiar with. Oh, you faked the whole thing. Oh, bummer. Um, so, oh, what have I done? Yeah, that's right. Birds aren't real, man. Um, so it sounds like most of you have seen an example of stage magic, right? Magic on a stage, like in Vegas or at a different casino, or if a magician comes to your school, right? It's probably stage magic. You've probably also seen close-up magic, right? That's like David Blaine, right? Like, where David Blaine's got some cards and he's like, watch. And then he picks your card, right? That's close-up magic. That's right in your face for a small number of people, as opposed to on a stage far away for a large number of people. And then there's parlor magic, which is in the middle. Parlor magic is what you would perform in a parlor, a living room, basically, for maybe a dozen people at most. It's kind of in between close-up magic and stage magic. And that was sort of like the magic of the day, right? Um, Oh, interesting. Yeah, if they really believe what they're doing. Kaya says there was a hypnotist that came, and my friend came off stage and told me, oh, whispered she felt peer pressure. Yeah. Yeah. Because not everybody is really that hypnotizable. I think a lot of people do play along. Although I did at this hypnotist I saw, it was Tony Lee, the triple X hypnotist, and he was doing some stuff with some people that he already got up on stage. And he goes to put them into a trance, right? And so he's like, okay, you're going to go to sleep now. When he's got a really deep voice. And no word of a lie, this guy who was I was seated at a bar stool, kind of on a little bar thing that it wasn't a bar, but it was like an island. And this guy standing maybe two people down from me just fell backwards. Um, uh, Pretty hard. He was okay, but when the hypnotist was like, "Okay, everybody sleep," this guy just fell. And then they went, and made sure he was okay, seemed to be very hypnotized. And then they brought him up on stage, and he was like the star of the show. Was he faking it? I don't know. But if he was, I mean, ouch. So, a lot of these tools of parlor magic were used by mediums as well. So, big giant muslin drapes that could be made to billow, trumpets that could create noise, a luminous paint, the spirit writing slates I mentioned earlier, rods that could be painted like matte black, and you could push objects that had been painted with glow in the dark paint to make it look like the spirits were moving objects in the room. Um, it's hard to say for certain the extent to which these mediums were using such techniques and whether they were developing their own. But we know that a number were caught cheating, and it is claimed by skeptics that any medium who was caught cheating should be assumed to have always been cheating. And I think that's actually quite fair, right? If it's kind of like if you're an athlete and you rely on steroids, are you a good athlete? Well, if you were, why were you relying on the steroids, right? Why did you need that if you're as good as you say you are? Um, if you really have paranormal abilities, why do you need non-paranormal assistance? I guess is what I'm saying. I realize that there are lots of reasons why athletes take steroids, right? Um, but so it's a loose analogy, but you get the idea, I think. Um, yeah. Oh, you were bummed that you weren't hypnotized. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, flexing like bodybuilders. Um, hypnosis is a real phenomenon, but it is quite, I think, misunderstood. A lot of you mentioned that people were playing along consciously. Um, Hypnosis is really just that. But when you are hypnotized, you are in a sort of you're not unconscious, but you're in a less conscious state, but you are essentially accepting and going along with suggestions. A hypnotist can't make you do anything that you would not do ordinarily. Like I can't hypnotize you and make you I can't like turn you into an assassin. Like I can't program you with hypnosis so that when you hear like Bucky, right? Like the Winter Soldier, I can't like brainwash you and then when I give you the password, you go into like assassin mode and kill somebody. Or like the Manchurian Candidate kind of thing, right? That's not how it works. But if you're open enough to suggestion, then yeah, people can be hypnotized. But hypnosis is it's still pretty misunderstood thing, right? You know, um, what is hypnosis like? It's kind of like you know how you get engrossed in a movie or a book or a video game. Hypnosis is kind of like that. except it's another person bringing you along. Um, Even if mediums hadn't been caught cheating, like Hume, there are still reasons to be skeptical, right? So nobody ever caught Hume cheating, but there are, the accounts of what he did are so different that we can probably attribute some of it to trickery combined with misremembering, right? There's a story of Hume levitating and then floating in and out of a window in an apartment. But the all of the witnesses' accounts of this seem to differ in very, very interesting ways. So basically, out of all of the witnesses to this, none of their accounts are the same, right? And that screams misremembering to me. Everybody's kind of remembered it a little bit differently. This happened to me, right, where the first time I watched David Blaine's Street Magic special. It was his very first one. It was called David Blaine Street Magic. And at the end um he does a levitation. The technique is actually called the Balducci levitation. And it's a levitation illusion where all you do is, like if these are my feet, so imagine my fingers are my toes and I'm flat, you stand up on, you lift one leg off the ground and on the other you stand on your toes, but you do it at such an angle that the shoe that's off the ground obscures your toes on the other foot, and it looks like you've levitated a few inches off the ground. David Blaine was doing this, and I thought, oh my God, how did he do that? And I remembered it being like this, like, oh my God, he was so far off the ground. Then I rewatched it a little bit later, and I was like, oh, he's actually not that far off the ground. It's not as impressive as I remember it. So, um, that's probably what happened with Hume, in certain cases, right? Um, Yeah. What's happening in the chat? Impressive ankle strength. Well, anyone can do this. You can do this. There's also the King Rising levitation where you need a sweater and you need a pair of loose-fitting shoes. Chris Angel had one where you have to make yourself an artificial leg out of a bucket. And it looks very impressive. Um, but basically, yeah, you take a bucket and some fabric and you make yourself like a little weird fake leg that goes over your real leg, and then you're able to like step up onto a step and rise up, and it looks like from the back that your leg is still down and you're just floating, even though it's just this weird fake leg you've put together. Like it's quite an interesting apparatus, but um I don't know. I guess we've already touched on this point. Some say, oh, even the best mediums will need to enhance their efforts from time to time. Would you accept that from your favorite athlete? I mean, remember Lance Armstrong? It was like, oh my God, Lance Armstrong, cancer survivor, winner multiple times, winning the Tour de France. What a guy. And then it came out that he had been using performance enhancing drugs. And everybody seemed very disappointed for good reason. I mean, most sports, the idea is to see, we take people with incredible talent and we pit them against each other to see who's the best at whatever they do, right? So we want it. And we allow things like you can train, you can exercise, you can eat, you can do diet, take some creatine or a Gatorade or whatever, but we don't allow steroids because it makes it somewhat unfair. Um, I have not heard of the enhanced games, but I am aware of. Okay, so during COVID, my little one of my little ways of keeping busy was watching like World's Strongest Man, right? Or like the Arnold Classic, or there's a bunch of them. But basically, they take a bunch of gigantic people and, do feats of strength, right? And those are open. Those are open competitions. And what that means is that, you can use steroids, just you don't want to get caught. It's the same with bodybuilding. That's why in bodybuilding they have um, the natural category and the open category. The natural category is for the people that don't use steroids. The open category is for the people that do use steroids, right? But outside of those exceptions, I don't know. If you found out that your favorite athlete who had been telling you like, all I do is train hard and use my talent and my training and my drive and my willpower, and then you find out they're using steroids, it's kind of like realizing your favorite singer doesn't sing live, but lip syncs at a concert, right? Uh, So I would think that if you found that a medium was cheating, it doesn't warrant continuing to believe in them, right? I think I would be disappointed. Yeah, I mean, but that's what sports is about, right? Like that guy, the swimmer, Michael Phelps, and he's just got like the lungs of a whale, right? Like he can just like hold so much air, and that makes him really great at swimming. It's like, yeah, yeah, you're built different. Like, and that's what sports is. Like, let's get all the guys with the whale lungs and see who swims the fastest. Right? Well, Jamal, I think, yeah, okay, that's fair. But that depends on what genre of music we're talking about. There are absolutely, I would say this is more so in pop. You tend to find this more in pop where you have auto tunes and vocalizers. Backing tracks are fine. I think backing tracks are actually fine. But if you're singing live with auto tune, that is not cool. I'm not down with that. Um, so yeah, it probably depends on what genre we're talking about. We're definitely seeing a lot more of that with the pop stuff. Um, but I'm talking like straight up lip syncing. I'll give you an example. There was a Super Bowl halftime show. It was a few years ago, and it was I think it was Usher. And anyway, he had that really good guitarist, her, H period E period R period her. So her was playing. She's a really kick-ass guitar player. Um, but she was not playing live. And I was like, oh my God, what? What's happening? Why did they do that? Well, that's what they always do at the Super Bowl. Only the lead vocals are live. Everything else is a backing track in case something goes wrong. And I thought, okay, I get that, but also that's disappointing because her is a really good guitar player, right? She doesn't need a backing track. So yeah, I was a little disappointed with that, but oh really? Which one was that, Leo? The joke plagiarizing drag queen from Drag Race. Who was that? Oh, Gottmik. Really? Really? Oh, disappointing. Disappointing. I remember Gottmik. I forget which season. I've seen so many episodes of that show that it all kind of blurs together. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of have I don't know. I confabulate it all together. It's just like one giant never-ending season. So yeah. Um yeah, I wouldn't have expected Gottmik to be to be doing that. Um yeah. And you know what? I still don't like it, the lip syncing. Um Um, I know we're getting off topic again, but no, there are a really good singer does not need that. Like someone said in the chat, like they're prioritizing. Who said this? They were prioritizing. Yeah, Fern says prioritizing watchability over artistry. Or Bell said, yeah, Bell said that, and Fern followed it up. Yeah, sorry, Fern. Um, yeah, teamwork. Yes. So, like, look, if I found out that somebody I know who can absolutely sing live does not need any assistance, I'm going to be mad. So if I believe in a psychic medium who then is using assistance or enhancement, no, I'm going to be mad. I don't believe in any mediums. I don't believe mediums are doing anything, but I do I can imagine that I would if I did, I would feel the same way as if I found out that my favorite vocalist was not performing live. So modern technology actually makes this stuff easier. It used to be that one of the tools you had to rely on for enhancing your act was called cold reading. Cold reading is when you get your interlocutor to unwittingly reveal the information to you that then you then use in a way that makes it seem like you obtain that information supernaturally, right? I'd be so mad if it was an in-person live event. But okay, so I'm full disclosure, I'm a bit of a metalhead and it's just not really a thing. The emphasis on musicianship in the metal community is very high. Whenever I remember there was a controversy over like Lucas Mann from Rings of Saturn. Um, um, and the reason was is that he was I mean, I don't like that band because they recorded everything literally one note at a time rather than playing the actual music. But they would also heavily rely on backing tracks live to kind of cover up the messy sound of the guitar and pass it off as if it was actually being played live. I did not like that. And there was a really big, there was a really big sort of kerfuffle over that in the metal fandom a few years ago. Anyway, so cold reading, um, is when I sort of solicit the information from you, right? Like if I say to you, if I'm a medium and I come up and I say, okay, I'm getting somebody wants to reach out and the name begins with an M or an N, and then an audience member says, that's my uncle Morty, right? And then I say, okay, Morty says hello, and I forgive you. You go home and you remember that I knew your uncle's name was Morty, but you told me that that was his name. So that's cold reading. Hot reading is a little more advanced, but hot reading is when we gather information beforehand. Magicians do it, psychics do it. I've got a clip from the James Randi documentary or the episode of Nova that I posted last week that shows Peter Popoff, a faith healer, using hot readings. Basically, he would have his audience members filling out prayer cards before they'd go into this service where he would do the laying on of hands and claim to heal people. And he had a little earpiece in his ear. And what was happening is his wife was reading him information from these prayer cards so that it looked like he was able to say, okay, you're this person, you have this disease, I'll cure you. Like he knew that because like the Holy Spirit had told him. But actually, it was his wife over the radio. So definitely check that out. But that's an example of hot reading. Yeah. Alexi Laiho, is that Children of Bodom? Didn't he die? Yeah. Miss him. Yeah. He died young. What a shame. I think he was only in his 40s. How do I feel like Master of Puppets being recorded slower and then being sped up for its release? Um, I don't know. I mean, they do play it. They have played it, and they do play it that fast live. Um, so I guess it doesn't really bother me. And like, yeah, Kirk Hammett and James Hetfield are demonstrably good guitar players, right? Regardless of what you think of Metallica, like they're pretty good. I think mostly this fakery is something you see on Instagram and TikTok a lot more now. You will see like fake guitar stuff. It's really I know this is like so off topic, but it's kind of maddening just as a guitar player who doesn't get enough time to practice. Like I'm not nearly as good as I used to be because I just don't have the time to practice anymore. And then I see some guy, or gal on Instagram get a bajillion views, but I can tell that it's fake. That makes me mad. Like, yeah. Um, yeah, I still don't like it, Fern. Yeah. The reason it bothered me, like when it came to Rings of Saturn, right? Like Rings of Saturn, my friend was getting into them. He's like, "Oh, they're so crazy, man." And I was listening and they're playing incredibly fast. But the whole thing for me was I was like, that's just not what it sounds like. Like that's just not what playing the guitar that fast sounds like when a human does it. I was like, did they record this one note at a time? I looked into it. Yeah, basically, one note at a time. And I'm like, that's just not what it sounds like. Yeah. Oh, you like MIDI? Yeah. I think there's a place for MIDI, but it's for composition. That's my personal opinion. But yeah, yeah. I haven't seen that Adam Neely video, Will, but I have been interested to watch it. It has come up on my feed. I'll check it out because Adam Neely makes good content. I like his stuff. Yeah, yeah, like I think that's fine. Listen to the MIDI guitar and try to learn to play it as a real guitar. Or yeah, compose. You can if you have a MIDI board, you can do composition. You can get all kinds of VSTs and synthesizers and make video game music or like I have the BBC Symphony Orchestra VST library on this computer, so I can make an orchestral piece with my stupid little MIDI board. I think that's fine for composition, or for making a backing track. Boy, we really are getting off topic. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm so sorry. Oh, there's the dog. Um, maybe what would help is a break. Should we take a break? Gosh, I hope we can finish this today. Yeah, we're not quite halfway through, but yeah, that's true. Taking those sample libraries and making it sound real is hard to do. Humanizing the art of the programming it's difficult to do. That is a skill in itself. Carolyn says yes for a break. Yeah. One thing I will say before we break, I was reading through ratemyprofessor.com. Sometimes I check and see how I'm doing there. One of the reviews was like, "Oh, Professor Redstone's super nice and his class is really interesting, but holy moly, is he ever a blabbermouth?" I was just thinking of that as I go on all of my digressions today. You're not wrong, student who left that comment wherever you are now. But let's take a break and let's come back at well, what time is it? It's about 3:58. So let's make it 15 minutes. So let's come back at like 13 after ish. Okay? Right. We'll see you all in about 15 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm glad to see everybody's engaging in the chat. That's good. A lot of good video game music out there. I don't know what my favorite would be. I don't play a lot of the Final Fantasy games, but I do like what I hear. In fact, I saw Final Symphony, the Ottawa, not the Ottawa Symphony, the national the NAC Symphony did the Final Fantasy music. I think mostly from 7 and 10. Um and My friend had an extra ticket and was like, You want to come along?" I was like, "I don't, yeah, sure." That was, oh, when was that? That was still in the winter. It was still cold. Um, it was in the wintertime sometime. But it was good. Um, yeah. Yeah. But I like when people take like the old, the 16-bit, 32-bit era stuff and play it like in a band or with real instruments. I like anything like that. Okay. I'm gonna really try and stay on topic this time as we aim to complete this lecture. So we talked about how there were certain mediums who were caught cheating. There were, even if a medium wasn't caught cheating, they had all of the tools available to them that parlor magicians have, and we know that parlor magicians are definitely not using paranormal abilities. Um, so. Um, I'm not going to say that all mediums are cheating, but there are good reasons to suspect foul play in a lot of cases. And even if there's not, there's also stuff that happens to us, right? Tula, come here. Stop whining. Sorry, my dog is whining. Come here, you. These seances take place in dimly lit rooms where we are prone to misperceiving things, to making mistakes. We can succumb to illusions. People can even hallucinate, right? Richard Wiseman, who's a skeptical parapsychologist, recreates these conditions in his fake seances. So he'd have an actor present in a table turning seance, and maybe the actor would claim the table was levitating when it wasn't. Maybe we'd have our glow in the dark objects moved by an assistant with a long stick that the other people can't see. In something like this, a third of people will say that they had that the table had moved, even if the table hadn't moved. Um, and of the people that report that the table really moved, they tend to be believers versus skeptics, right? This reminds me of, again, one of the clips from Ghost Adventures that I was watching where, you'll get somebody yelling like, "Oh, this happened," and everybody kind of goes with it, even though they didn't see it. One It was such a strange clip. They were doing the Bloody Mary thing, where you stand in front of a mirror and you say Bloody Mary 3 times. The guy's looking in the mirror and he's like, "Oh, my eyes are disappearing. I just see black holes where my eyes should be. Oh, now my face is disappearing. I can't see my face." And the camera's on him the whole time, and you can clearly see his reflection in the mirror, But, someone says it and everybody kind of goes with it. Um, but yeah. Tula, come on, stop that. Stop that. So, uh, a lot of Victorian scientists, like Michael Faraday, who we'll talk about in a moment, were skeptical of the spiritualism stuff. Magicians were too. I mean, Harry Houdini was a famous skeptic. But some took this stuff seriously, not just scientists, but other spiritualists, such as Arthur Conan Doyle, right? Which I've mentioned previously. Yeah, Michael Faraday, the Faraday cage guy. Exactly. He did a lot of public demonstrations with electricity. Um, and that's where the Faraday cage comes from. One of the scientists who took spiritualism very seriously was William Crookes, a chemist, right? He claimed to have taken photographs of ghosts And I mentioned this last time. It was his younger brother. It was his younger brother Philip, who died at the age of 21 in 1867. Crookes was very affected by the loss of his younger brother, and he would try and contact him in a seance with the help of a spirit medium later that year. Crookes was also convinced of Daniel Douglas Hume's powers. Um, this was one of the motivations of the claim of Crookes and other psychical researchers that these were natural phenomena that really just hadn't been explained yet. So perhaps certain individuals have these special abilities, and maybe one day they'll become the norm, right? Like the whole X-Men thing. Um, or maybe their abilities represented, some kind of energy that physics had yet to understand, right? What's the motivation? Um, well, other than um, in the case of Crooks, I think it's pretty clear that Crooks was very affected by the loss of his brother. Um, the loss of a loved one affects you very deeply, and the prospect of communicating with a lost loved one is obviously very appealing, and that explains the draw here, right? But that's not the only thing going on. Blackmore thinks that also there's a sort of rebelliousness, a sort of antagonism toward materialism, or as we call it now, physicalism, right? Physics in the 19th century was so successful that we thought we had finished doing it. We thought we had completed physics. That's until Einstein comes along, right? And then you get general and special relativity and you get quantum mechanics. But the physics in the 19th century was very successful. But it did like the stuff that precede from the end of the scientific revolution, from where when Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica through the 19th century. Um, very successful, did not leave any room for the supernatural, right? No God, no life after death, but also maybe not even free will. Like think of Pierre de Laplace, right? Who published a book on astronomy about the motions of the planets in the solar system, which was very famous and which was read by many people, including Napoleon. And Napoleon is said to have asked Laplace, why don't you talk about God in your book? And Laplace replied, I had no need of that hypothesis, sir. Could explain everything, the motions of the planet, everything to do with the motions of the planets without appealing to the supernatural or the divine. And from this, this description of this materialistic, deterministic universe emerged that is encapsulated nicely by Laplace's demon. Um, in a clockwork universe, in a deterministic material universe, everything that happens is determined by prior conditions. And Laplace's demon is a being with godlike knowledge. And the idea is, if this being has godlike knowledge, it knows all of the laws of nature, it knows all of the initial conditions. So this demon could predict with exact certainty where you'll be, and what you'll be doing, like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, or could predict, given, right at the origin of the universe, would know that, oh, 13 and a half billion years later, there's going to be this planet called Earth, and there's going to be these beings on it called humans, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, in this sort of deterministic universe, there's not only no room for the supernatural, but it seems almost like no room for free will and agency. Darwin, not a physicist, but his theory of evolution also sort of undermines our special place in the universe. Post Darwin, it's sort of impossible to believe that we're created in the image and likeness of God. Unless, you go for like theistic evolution or something like that. Theistic evolution is the idea that God guides evolution rather than that we are, we're not created ex nihilo or from mud in the image and likeness of God, but rather that God guided the evolution of life on Earth so that now we are in the image and likeness of God, right? But post Darwin, it's almost impossible to believe that we were created according to the creation account in the book of Genesis, right? This is actually what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche means when he says God is dead and we have killed him. Our science, Darwin, Newton, all the way through to, like Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell. The science has made it impossible to believe in this God that we used to believe in. And that means we have kind of killed this source of meaning that we have for our lives. That's what Nietzsche means when he says God is dead and we have killed him. I don't think so. I mean, I'm not a Christian, so I maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, right? But yeah, I think they would. I think somebody who believes in theistic evolution would think of the Adam and Eve story as something like an allegory. And I would argue that's actually the proper way to understand it anyway. I don't think it's supposed to be taken literally. I think it's supposed to be an allegory, like for humankind in its innocence, and then we get knowledge of good and evil, and all of a sudden we find that we're not in paradise anymore because we have knowledge. I mean, come on, that's like so allegorical. It's better as an allegory than as a literal account of creation, right? But yeah, I think maybe if somebody believes in theistic evolution, they would reject this Garden of Eden idea. They wouldn't believe it literally happened, right? I think the people that like the biblical literalists actually are nowadays quite rare. I don't know of too many people that are biblical literalists, like to believe that, Adam and Eve were created by God, formed out of clay, and life breathed into them. The earth is less than 10,000 years old, right? Um, I don't. I think comparatively few Christians actually believe in that now. Yeah, and Fern, you're right. They'll be literalist about some things, but not other things. Like they'll be really literalist if they're, I don't know, homophobic, but they still trim their beard and eat pork and wear polyester and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I'm not religious, but a lot of people that I know who are not literalists, right? Um, So it's looking like there's no room for the soul. There's no room for God, no room for spirituality. Maybe Blackmore says spiritualism, and if spiritualism, the notion of life after death, offers us an alternative to this cold, meaningless reality that we seem to find ourselves in. And that appeals to a lot of people, right? Now, here's where Faraday comes in. Faraday was a chemist and a physicist working in the 19th century, but he was also a skeptic. He realized that there would be huge implications for science if spiritualism were true. So he wanted to investigate this. And, Faraday's a very interesting character. Faraday did not really have much of a formal education. He worked out a lot of interesting facts about electricity, but he couldn't do the math to sort of formalize all of it. So it was James Clerk Maxwell who kind of it's those two together that we can thank for, theories of electromagnetism and stuff like that. And Faraday was known for giving public science demonstrations, right? Like standing in a Faraday cage and having lots of electricity shoot at him, and he's safe in the Faraday cage, right? Um, yeah, yeah, I agree. He was a multidisciplinary guy, and that's a great way to be a scientist, right? And hey, if you can't do the math, someone can. Um, Faraday is famous for the whole what use is a newborn baby, right? Queen Victoria, she's got getting a demonstration on electricity, and she asks, well, what use is this? And Faraday famously replied, "What, madam, is the use of a newborn baby? Well, not much now, but once it grows up, it it could be very useful. It'll be a productive member of society, right? And electricity in this time was very much a newborn baby. Now, of course, many of us would find life without electricity kind of a pain, right? Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you, like it's true with my like when I went over to cognitive science, I thought, oh my God, I'll be a terrible scientist because I'm just not that mathematically inclined. But I got through it, and the math wasn't even a problem. And so then I thought, well, now I'm going to have to learn to code if I'm going to do cognitive science. And no, I didn't even have to do that. They have people for that. Um, so. Yeah, you can be a good scientist. Lots of ways to be a good scientist. So how did Faraday tackle this spiritualism stuff? Well, remember, this was when people were doing these table turning seances. So here's a picture here. I assume this is our medium because of the sort of heavy metal kind of makeup that she's wearing. But regardless who the medium is, this is the setup. You're in a dark room. Everybody places their hands on the table. And the medium tries to contact the dead. And what happens is the table starts to move as if a ghost is trying to communicate with the people who are holding the seance. But Faraday was not convinced that there was anything supernatural going on here, and he devised a way of seeing what was going on. He had to work out, basically, whether the table was moving on its own or whether people's hands were moving the table without those people realizing what they were doing. So he came up with this interesting experiment where he designed these special cards that could be stuck to the table with this sort of cement, like a glue. Now, just like with a regular seance, everybody puts their hands on the table. But this time, we have the cards attached to the table with this cement. And by looking at how the cement looked after the seance, he would be able to determine whether it was the tables that had moved or whether it was people's hands that were moving the table. And it turns out it was people's hands that were moving the table. But they were doing so without realizing what they were doing. Nowadays, we call this the ideomotor effect, and it happens all the time in lots of different contexts. So, so here, what's going on is everybody's got their hands on the table, and we're all, whoa, the table's moving. I'm not doing that. Are you doing that? Are you doing that? Oh, no, no one's doing that. Well, you are, but you don't realize you're doing it, right? What are some other examples of the ideomotor effect? One we'll encounter later on in this lecture is dowsing. Who knows what dowsing is? Anybody ever go dowsing? Maybe your grandpa or something taught you how to dowse. I'll tell you something. When I was a kid, my father showed me how to do it, and I thought it worked. Yeah, yeah, Kalis, with the rods. Or often when we're looking for water, we also use a Y-shaped stick. Yeah, like in Coraline. Oh, I'm so disappointed in Neil Gaiman. Oh. Oh, I've gone from one digression to another digression, but I just can't. Neil Gaiman, man. Oh, I read American Gods. I thought it was great. I read Sandman. I thought, oh, holy shit, this is incredible. I'm just so disappointed about Neil Gaiman. I'm not going to go into it, but look it up. I'm just so mad and disappointed about Neil Gaiman. Ugh, I know how all the Harry Potter fans feel now. Well, at least Pratchett, I mean, that was with Pratchett, right? Terry Pratchett. Yeah. I never read the Good Omens stuff. I should have. Now I don't know if I want to. I was right in the middle of rereading Sandman when all that news dropped, and I was like, "Oh, I can't." So I went and put it on the bottom of my. It used to be sitting beside my bed. I had to take it away and put it on the bottom of my bookshelf downstairs. I'm so disappointed. But yes, in Coraline they do some dowsing. Um, and like Jamal said, a lot of times it's with those L-shaped rods, like what you would see in the episode of Nova when James Randi goes to Russia and they're trying to determine the charge. the psychic charge of the water, he uses dowsing rods, right? That's the ideomotor effect. What's happening is that you are um, moving the rods without realizing what you're doing. Or sometimes people douse with a pendulum. So, like a little crystal hung from a chain or something, and it'll swing a certain way. That's also the ideomotor effect. When we know this because we do double blind studies uh, of dowsers where neither the dowser will hide something under a series of buckets, but not, and the dowser has to find the object, but neither the dowser nor the supervisor of the experiment knows where it's been hidden. So, if I know where it's been hidden, I might look at the bucket it's under, and the dowser might pick up on that unconsciously. So we get rid of that worry by doing a double blind experiment. And it's been shown that the most reasonable explanation is the ideomotor effect. Another example that we'll encounter shortly is the Ouija board. Who's used a Ouija board? Did it work? Kaya, do you want to tell us your story?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's a little crazy and I don't expect anyone to believe me and like if ever anyone explained to me like how this happened, I'd be open to listening, but
Sure.
it definitely stands out to me. I had a friend who like claimed to be very spiritual and very in tune with these types of things. So we sort of put it to the test where I didn't have my hand on the planchette, like the little piece that moves at all. I was sitting across the room and I was thinking the questions. I was making sure not to mouth them. I was fully sober. And I was getting answers for the questions. Like I would think to myself, like, what color am I thinking of? And the color, like, oh, blue would be spelled out. So
Hmm.
I don't have an explanation as to how that happened, but it definitely is a huge standout to me.
Yeah, it's freaky. Like, I mean, even if there's nothing paranormal going on, it's weird. Like, it's weird, right? It's one of those things that doesn't quite compute. Uh, and I think that's why so many people have spooky experiences with Ouija boards, right? A few other people have tried it too. Belle was my friend was lying about not moving it. Sarah's been too scared to try. Don't be scared. My parents always had one of these, and I remember some cousins were up visiting one time and they found it and they were like, "Oh, we got to do this. We got to do the Ouija board." And one of them was really, really into the Backstreet Boys because it was the 90s. Okay, they were huge. I didn't like them, but this cousin person did. And with, not even an attempt at being slow or subtle, she's asking, who will I marry when I grow up? Zoop, 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 zoop. And the planchette spells out Nick Carter like so fast. And I thought, well, looking back, like, well, that's not even the ideomotor effect. That's just you really had a huge crush on Nick Carter. So yeah. Yeah, manifesting. Yeah, maybe we can manifest a Nick Carter marriage. Although no, I don't think so. Is he still, did he die? Or was that Aaron Carter, his brother? I'm sorry, that's morbid. I was like, what happened to him? Oh, okay. Well, good, good, good. I'm glad he's alive. I hope he's okay, even though not my cup of tea. Yes. Oh, it's always a matter of time before someone brings that video up. Somebody needs to share that in the Discord, or I will. But yeah, can you burn a Luigi board? How do you use a Luigi board? Is a Luigi board haunted? If you haven't seen it, you gotta see it. It's good for a laugh. But this is a popular means of trying to contact the spirits of the dead, using a Ouija board or a Luigi board, as I suppose a lot of people on Yahoo Answers thought it was spelled. Actually, I'll explain the name to you. It's just a portmanteau of oui and ja. So, oui, French for yes, ja, German for yes. So the Ouija board is the like a yes board. Um, I don't know why it's called that. You'd think it might be called a yes no board because it could answer yes or no. But in any case, this was initially marketed as simply a toy. But it's been, taken up as a sort of tool for mediumship. But when we use it, are we really talking to the dead? Probably not. It's probably the ideomotor effect. How did we figure this out? There's a really interesting study discussed in Blackmore, done by Richard Wagner. Passed away a few years ago. He used to teach psychology at Harvard University. He does a really cool experiment that we're going to look at. But consider these earlier studies by William Gray Walter on precognitive arousal. And this is really interesting because it relates to our sense of freedom, our sense of free will, our sense of agency. Now, really, William Gray Walter was a neuroscientist, and he had patients who were undergoing brain surgery. And since they were undergoing brain surgery, it was an opportunity to also do some research. So he would recruit experimental subjects who also had to have brain surgery, and he could install electrodes in their motor cortex. And he could do really interesting experiments to study something called precognitive arousal. He'd have them sit in front of a projector, and they'd have to press a button to change slides on the projector. And the people thought that it was the button presses that were changing the slides. But what was actually going on is this button wasn't doing anything. Actually, it was the activity from their motor cortex that was being picked up and amplified by these electrodes that was changing the slide. So it wasn't the actual button press, it was the motor command to push the button that was being detected and amplified, and that's what changed the slides. Now, the participants didn't know this, and they felt like it was their button press that was changing the slide, even though it wasn't. So something similar is going on with a Ouija board and with the ideomotor effect. Here, we feel like we are causing an action, even though the action that's bringing about the subsequent action, the button press, we feel like we're pressing the button. We are. And we also feel like that button press is changing the slide. It's not. It's actually the precognitive arousal. It's the motor command and the motor cortex that's doing it. Nonetheless, we feel like our button presses are moving the slides. Kind of like a flipped over version of the ideomotor effect, where we are causing the movement, but we don't feel as if we are. So that's very interesting. Um, if we manipulate the time a little bit, we get a startling effect where just before the button is pressed, uh, the slide changes. And that would feel kind of spooky, right? So this shows that we can be in control of certain actions without feeling that we are, and we can not be in control of certain actions while feeling that we are. And this sort of thing might help us to explain what's happening with Ouija boards, with dowsing rods, with pendulums for dowsing. Also certain assisted communication devices. So there are certain assisted communication devices that you use together with somebody who's nonverbal. It could be somebody like on the autism spectrum who's nonverbal or not very verbal, or somebody with some other sort of developmental disorder that makes communication difficult. I think there was a documentary program on this entitled "Tell Me You Love Me," where there was a man who had great difficulty communicating. I think he had severe cerebral palsy, and his partner had this assistive communication device, but and because of the way the ideomotor effect is at play here, there were questions raised over whether this guy was actually a willing participant in the relationship, right? So these certain assistive communication devices can succumb to this effect. Um, okay, in the interest of time, let's keep going. Um, so it can happen both ways, right? We can cause an action without feeling like we're causing it, and we can not. We can feel like we're causing an action even when we're not causing an action. Um, Okay, the Ouija board. Oh, Kai, you found out the thing. You found the origins of it. A medium said the board named itself. Oh, interesting. And explained it meant good luck, which is sometimes why it says good luck on boards, and it just stuck. Oh, cool. Oh, interesting. I guess that medium might have been bilingual or multilingual. Okay. Uh, Wegner's experiment with the Ouija board. This is really cool. Okay, so um, can our brains, like, we know that during the ideomotor effect, instances of the ideomotor effect, we're causing an action without feeling like we're causing an action. Um, this experiment uses the Ouija board to explore whether we can get the feeling that we have caused an action even when we haven't. And this is really interesting because it's related to questions concerning free will and agency. Um, Now, Daniel Wegner is kind of a free will skeptic. He calls the experience of free will the mind's best trick. He thinks that it's actually an illusion. Now, what is an illusion? Elsewhere in this book, Blackmore is very careful to emphasize that an illusion is not something that does not exist, but rather something that is different than it appears. Now, while Wegner is a bit of a free will skeptic, Blackmore isn't. Right? Blackmore is a compatibilist, which means that she believes um, you can have free will in a deterministic universe. But Wegner thinks that free will is an illusion, or the experience of free will is an illusion. Basically, he thinks that three things need to happen. Your brain has to be planning actions and preparing to carry them out. And brains are doing this all the time, right? They just do this. So if I look at my coffee cup over here, my brain forms a motor plan for reaching out and picking up the coffee cup and taking a sip. Now, I might not reach out and take a sip because the brain also inhibits a lot of that activity. Otherwise, I would be doing random things all the time. In fact, there's an interesting brain disorder called environmental dependency syndrome where this inhibition doesn't seem to work properly. And I might look at, I might be lecturing and then turn and see the door to the back deck here and just get up and walk out the door because I'm not able to inhibit my motor plan of opening the door and leaving. So the brain's always doing this. It's always planning out actions, preparing to perform the actions. And then afterwards, we become consciously aware of performing the action. That's the intention. And then we act. And if the action follows the intention and they occur close enough together in succession, we conclude that it was our intention that caused the action, even though our brain was planning the action before we were aware of our intention to perform the action. And if you've read this whole chapter, you see something similar to this in the work of Benjamin Liebe, right? Who studied the readiness potential. So this change in electrical potential in motor and premotor areas associated with moving your wrist or flexing your wrist. And he found that the readiness potential preceded the conscious awareness of the intention to act by a few hundred milliseconds, which sounds fast, but is actually quite a long time in neurological terms. So as Richard Gregory, the British psychologist Richard Gregory said, all of this stuff, Liebe's research, which we're not really talking about here, but you can read about it in this chapter. Wegner's research suggests maybe that we don't have free will, but we do have free won't, in the sense that we can, our brains are always preparing for actions. We're not always aware of them, but we can allow certain of them to proceed and inhibit other actions. So we don't have free will, we have free won't. I like that. Um, so Wegner suggests there are these three requirements, right, for us to experience having willed something intentionally to happen. The thought has to occur before the action. It's got to be consistent with the action, and it can't be accompanied by other causes. So if I conclude that I've freely reached out and took the coffee cup because I thought, oh boy, I'd like to take a sip of that coffee. My thought is consistent with the action. It occurs close enough in time, and it's not accompanied by other causes. Nobody's put a chip in my brain so they can remotely control my arm such that I pick up the cup and take a drink, right? So to look into this, Talia Wheatley and Daniel Wegner conducted a really interesting experiment using a sort of Ouija board where the planchette was replaced by a board mounted on a computer mouse. So basically, they're using a little mouse as with a board on it as the planchette, the little piece that you would move on a Ouija board. And it moved on a screen. So instead of a Ouija board, there's a screen with 50 small objects. They tested about 51 undergrad participants, but each participant was actually paired up with what we call an experimental confederate. That is somebody who's in on it. So I sit down. There's another person doing the experiment with me. I'm an undergraduate. I think they're another undergraduate, but they're not. They're a member of the lab doing the experiment. So we're going to call the participant Dan and the confederate Jane, because that's what Blackmore does. So Dan and Jane are facing each other. Dan is the participant, Jane is the confederate. They place their hands on the board and they're asked to move the cursor over these objects, kind of like how I can move my mouse over my screen, right? So we're moving the mouse and we're moving it over these objects. And they're required to stop every 30 seconds and then rate how strong their intention to make the stop was. They do this with Likert scales. So, on a scale from 1 to 7, with 1 being very low and 7 being very high, how strong was your intention to stop? Now, each trial, they're also wearing headphones, and words are playing through the headphones. Then music is played for 10 seconds, indicating that they should stop. So they're listening to just random words that may or may not match up with the objects. When they hear the music, that means they've got 10 seconds to stop. Dan believes he's hearing one set of words and Jane is hearing another. But Jane is actually hearing instructions from the experimenter on what movements she's supposed to make. Now, in a number of different trials, we vary uh, the time uh, at which Dan hears the word of the object that Jane is supposed to stop on. So Jane, in 4 trials, Jane's got to stop on a swan, and Dan is hearing the music. So Dan hears the word in one trial, maybe 30 seconds before he's supposed to stop. In another condition, 5 seconds before. In another 1 second before, or maybe 1 second after Jane stops on the swan. In other trials, there were no forced stops. And what happened to the participants, to our Dans? Well, they gave the highest agreement ratings for I intended to make the stop when the word swan came 1 or 5 seconds before the stop. They gave the lowest agreement ratings when it was 1 second after or 30 seconds before. And this gave rise to something that Wegner called the priority principle. We experience effects as willed on this principle when the relevant thoughts occur just before the actions. Now, I know this is big and convoluted and complicated. I've thrown a lot of details at you here. Is everybody clear on what's going on in this experiment? Okay, Kai is good. Anyone else not quite sure? Maybe it's better if I ask you if you're not quite sure. And if you want to tell me what you're not, kind of. Dan isn't being primed with the words. Um, but the idea is if Dan hears the word swan 5 seconds before he stops, um, amidst that music, he's going to feel more like he intended to stop on that object, as opposed to like, oh, I'm just close to the swan. I guess that's where we stop, right? So but it's actually Jane who's making the stops. And what we're recording is how much Dan felt like he intended to stop there. And he feels more like he intended to stop where he did if the relevant thoughts occur either 5 seconds or 1 second before the stop. So the closer we are to the stop, if the word matches the object, the more Dan feels like he meant to do that. That's what we're finding here. Really, Dan isn't doing a whole lot. Dan is controlling the cursor with Jane. Dan thinks he's just like, oh, the cursor's going where it's going. It's the ideomotor effect. Actually, Jane is controlling where the cursor is going. So it's just like a Ouija board. Dan is just like, oh, it's moving, and who knows where we'll stop. But it's Jane who's moving it based on the instructions she's hearing. And then Dan feels more or less like he willed himself to stop moving, depending on when he hears the word that matches the object he stops on. Make sense? It takes a few, like you got to think your way through it. If you're not sure what's happening, read through the part of the chapter again, or think your way through the experiment again. Imagine that you're Dan and you're hearing words and you're stopping. And then imagine that you're Jane receiving instructions from the experimenters. Imagine yourself in both Dan's and Jane's shoes. And that will help you think your way through this experiment. Because I admit, first time I read through this, I was like, huh, what? What's happening? Got to read this again. That's fine. If you got to read it again, read it again. No problem. So, what do these results show? Well, they show that the experience of will can be elicited even when you haven't actually exercised voluntary choice. Because remember, Dan's just going with the flow, right? He's just going with the flow. Dan is not actually choosing when to stop. It's the ideomotor effect in his case. Jane is the one moving the planchette around, and she's doing it according to instructions. Nonetheless, Dan still feels like he exercised his will and decided to stop if he heard the word swan close enough to stopping on the item swan. Yeah, Jane is the mole. Jane is like a mole. But we'll call her a Confederate because mole sounds like she's a spy or something, right? But yeah, basically Jane is in on it, and Dan doesn't know that until the experiment is over and he's debriefed. So when Dan leaves, he's debriefed. That means the experimenters say, okay, so what we were actually doing was looking at evidence for the priority principle. Jane was actually in on it with us. Here's why we're doing this experiment, et cetera, et cetera. That's called debriefing. So Dan doesn't know. He's a naive participant. And then once the experiment's over, we tell him what we're really doing, right? This might also explain, again, why people believe they can influence things with their thoughts, right? Like the omnipotence of thought or magical thinking, right? Why do some people believe they can influence the rolls of dice or the spins of a wheel or, whether their favorite sports team will be victorious or suffer defeat? Um, we can feel like we're causing an action even when we're not, right? So if I'm like cheering really hard and then all of a sudden they score a goal, it felt like, oh, we all did that because we were all cheering so hard. So we caused that to happen. It feels like that, even though it's not what happened, right? You couple this priority principle stuff with apophenia, right? Seeing connections between two things which are not in reality connected with one another. And you've got a powerful recipe for feeling like your thoughts can actually influence reality. So that's very interesting. Does this all mean that free will doesn't exist? Um, no, I don't think so. Um, one of the things that we do in this class right, is try and connect the questions that we're looking at that are related to paranormal or anomalistic phenomena to other big questions in philosophy, like whether there is freedom of the will. And I am, this is way beyond the scope of this class, but if you are a philosophy major or if you have taken other philosophy courses, you've undoubtedly asked questions concerning freedom of the will and of agency before. Even if you're not a philosophy student, you've probably wondered, like, do I have free will or are all of my actions determined, right? There are kind of three, broadly speaking, three camps. One is libertarian free will. These are all metaphysical theories, by the way. So on libertarian free will, I am just the kind of being that is free. I am not determined. I'm not determined by my past, my upbringing. What do I want for supper? That commercial for uh, Pizza Hut I saw on television, that's not going to work on me, man. I'm going to have a salad, right? I'm a free agent, right? Then there's hard determinism, kind of like what we saw with Laplace's demon, right? The universe is completely determined. What happens in the future depends on the laws of nature and on the present conditions, and that determines the future. But then there's soft determinism or compatibilism. It's compatibilism in the sense that free will is actually compatible with a deterministic universe. And that's where I sit. That's where a lot of other thinkers sit. On compatibilism, sure, we live in a deterministic universe, but I'm free in the sense that I am the author of my actions. Like I am the agent that causes those actions to happen. Nobody is coercing me. Nobody's got a gun to my head, telling me to do this or that. Um, I'm free in the sense, sometimes you see it put this way, like you're free in the sense that you could have done otherwise. Like, sure, I could have ordered that pizza, but I had the salad, and the reason why I had the salad was because I thought I'm going to try and be good and eat salad and eat healthy. That is my intention. My actions are caused by my intentions, so I am acting for reasons that I have even though those reasons might arise out of unconscious mental processes, if I'm acting on the basis of reasons that I endorse, I'm free, even if the universe is deterministic. That's where most people sit, I think. Um, yeah, but I was the one who decided. It's kind of like Schopenhauer said, like Arthur Schopenhauer famously said, um, man can choose what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. So, like, I can decide to eat. Um, I could decide to eat pizza or salad or any number of things that I enjoy, but I can't really make myself eat something I hate, right? Um, it's kind of like that. And it's fine if I'm influenced. What matters is whether I allow myself to act on the basis of that influence, right? Like maybe just, maybe that delicious looking pizza is pushing my dopamine buttons and I think, "Oh boy, if I ate that pizza, I'd feel really good," you know. But also, I might feel good for eating healthy. I might feel good by being healthy, so I eat the salad. Sure, I've been influenced, but I was the one who did the selecting, right? That's the important part. Okay, so what does this all have to do with Ouija boards and seances? Well, basically that there are basically I think the conclusion we ought to draw here is that there are more parsimonious explanations for seances, for claims of communicating with the dead, than the supernatural or paranormal answers. What do I mean by that? Well, parsimony, the principle of parsimony. Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. The simplest answer is most likely the correct answer. We can explain the curious events that occur during the seances of the 19th century. We can explain the demonstrations of mediums of the 20th and 21st centuries without positing any supernatural explanations. We've got the parlor magic supplies of the 19th century. We've got cold reading and hot reading techniques. We know how these work. In the case of Ouija boards, we know about the ideomotor effect. Likewise with dowsing. There's no need to posit a supernatural explanation if a natural explanation suffices, right? And that's the principle of parsimony. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm just saying, if you want to be as sure as you can be about this stuff, it is good to stick with the principles of naturalism, of scientific materialism, if you want to call it that. Um, Sorry, my phone's calling. My phone's calling. My partner's calling. One moment. She forgot I was teaching. Okay. Yeah. Parsimony. Yeah. I think I said all I need to say about that. What do you think? Are you more or less skeptical? If you believed in mediums and psychics and Ouija boards and seances before, are you a little more doubtful? Are you still just as strong in your beliefs as you were before? Are you maybe a little more open-minded to naturalistic explanations? What do you think? What do you think? And remember, this is a judgment-free zone. It's okay if you're not sure, right? Sometimes you have to kind of let this stuff stew a little bit. But I'll tell you one thing. Um, yeah, good. It's good that you're open-minded. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, which I'll say again toward the end, but you believe what you want, practice your beliefs how you want, but watch how you spend your money, right? Um, Because there are people out there there are people out there who do this more or less innocently. Like you do a Ouija board session with your friends. Maybe you do some tarot card stuff with your friends. What's the harm in that? I don't think there's much harm. It's when people start charging you lots and lots of money, right? It's when the psychic medium says, "I can help you find love if you pay me $20,000," right? Yeah, don't do that, okay? Have fun with this stuff, but don't spend your money on it, okay? That's all I'm saying. Or just a little bit. Spend a little bit. Get yourself a Ouija board or a set of cards and have fun with it. Don't drop $20,000 to find your one true love because a psychic says that they can do that for you, right? But yeah, when it comes to ghosts, how could we prove it? Where do we start? Yeah. Um, yeah, okay, yeah. Kind of like almost like a tool. Like I've likened tarot cards almost like to a Rorschach test, where the test doesn't actually tell you anything objective, but maybe what you see tells you something about yourself. I take the same thing with dreams. Like some people want to know what their dreams mean, right? So they're like, "Oh, I dreamt of my teeth falling out. What does that mean?" Well, it doesn't like symbolically mean anything, but maybe you can make sense of it in the context of your own life, and that might be helpful. So yeah, you know. Some people are still skeptic. Yeah, good, good. Oh, I'm getting a question. I'm getting a personal question. That's okay. Yeah. Do I believe in the paranormal, or do any of my friends or family believe in the paranormal? I do not believe in the paranormal. I am a skeptic, of course. My partner is also skeptical, quite skeptical. Um, I guess. Oh well. Hang on. There is one paranormal thing I believe in: aliens. I definitely think there are aliens out there somewhere, but they'll just be normal, regular old aliens. Nothing, I don't know why, it's funny that aliens are lumped under the paranormal umbrella because as soon as we know for certain that there is alien life, it's not going to be paranormal anymore. It's just part of our scientific knowledge now, right? Yeah. Yeah, maybe there'll be weird bacteria or something growing on one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn or something. Yeah, Leo, I agree, right? Like, I think statistically, given the size and age of the universe, there's got to be aliens. Are they visiting Earth and abducting people and probing them? No, probably not, right? Um, yeah. Or yeah, like I said earlier, or like Fern says here, if ghosts are real, then new physics, right? Um, I did have a partner back in the day. My high school sweetheart was very into um mediums and stuff, and I was like, "Come on, man, no," you know. Yeah, I think it's much more like Lena says, it's much more unlikely that there are not aliens and that we're the only ones. But but are they visiting us on flying saucers and doing weird stuff to people that they abduct? I doubt it. I doubt it. Um, but yeah, my ex was really into mediums, and she watched John Edwards or Edward Edwards, I can't remember, James Van Prague, um, who I think when you go back and look back at some of their videos, it's obviously cold and hot reading. Um, the worst was Sylvia Brown. Sylvia Brown would straight up gaslight people, right? And don't take my word for it. Go watch clips of Sylvia Brown doing readings with people, and there are times when they catch her like, oh no, like, oh, I see that your daughter died in a fire, and it's like, no, no, she died this way, and it's like, no, no, you're wrong. I see fire, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, what an awful person. Um, Now I guess the new one is Tyler Henry. Have you guys seen Tyler Henry? You heard of Tyler Henry, the medium, the celebrity psychic? He only does readings for celebrities. Um, I'll wait to hear from everybody on that one. But yeah, Jamal says anyone who can tell you that they can speak to the dead or see the future for profit, I think is a grifter. However, that doesn't mean I don't believe in spirits. Yeah, fair. That's fair. Uh, for me, spiritualism is more of a cultural thing. Yeah, like, I don't really know if it is true or not, but also don't care. My grandmother can perform a ritual to protect me from the evil eye, or I'll listen to my aunt. The specific place has bad spirits. Yeah, I think that's actually pretty good way to go about this. Let's say for the sake of argument that there are spirits, I would still be skeptical of anybody charging you money to contact them, right? Like, even if I believed in ghosts, I would say, don't give your money to people that tell you they can talk to ghosts, right? Um, so yeah, Jamal, I think that's super reasonable actually, and probably a good thing to keep in mind. Yeah. Yeah, Fern, we're gonna talk about ghost cameras. Um, oh, what? Germa, who's Germa and a dick on the wall? What? A dick doodle? What? Because I'm sorry, Fern. Okay, there's a video. All right, I'll just watch that after. Maybe go. I mean, one of the most prevalent forms of graffiti throughout history has been penises. So if ghosts are real, maybe they also draw them. I don't know. Yeah, it's relevant. I know it's relevant. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very good, Kaya. That's good. Yeah, I was about to say, you used to have to stand very still for a long time for a photograph. And so some of the earliest ghost photographs took advantage of the characteristics of early photography, which, by the way, a lot of people didn't know a lot about, right? So here's a ghost photograph from William H. Mumler. Do you recognize the ghost? Anybody recognize this ghost? You have to kind of look closely. Very famous person. Yes, Abraham Lincoln. Yes, and this is in fact Lincoln's wife. Here's Lincoln's wife and apparently his ghost. Although Abraham Lincoln was actually very tall. He was something like somewhere between 6'4" and 6'6". This ghost looks too short to be Lincoln. So I'm skeptical, okay? But this was done with early photographic techniques that required a very long exposure time. Nowadays, if you see the same sort of apparition in a photograph, you can probably be reasonably certain that it's a camera artifact. So again, overexposure. The fact is that even though we all have cameras in our pockets now, not all of us know exactly what we're doing with them, right? Um, yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Carolyn, like when you use a sparkler to write your name in a photograph, you have to keep the shutter open for a few seconds to do that. That's exactly what's happening here. It's the same technique that I use when I go and take pictures of fireworks, and I get long trails of light. It's because I leave the lens open for like 1 to 2 seconds, or no, or the shutter. I leave the shutter open. So that's called long exposure. Same thing with star trails, or recently, like we're in a period now of increased solar activity, which means there's a lot of solar flares, a lot of material being ejected from the sun, and that hits our magnetic field and gets kind of channeled down towards the poles. And that interacts with the atmosphere and ionizes gases in the atmosphere, and that's where we get the northern lights. So like last summer through the winter, I was seeing a lot of the northern lights. You could see them with the naked eye, but you can see them a lot better by doing a long exposure shot with your camera. So I have like all of the northern lights photos because I just happened to be lucky. But some very good stuff. But long exposure is going to get you the best results. Same here, you do long exposure, you can have somebody in the picture and then leave, or you can combine images. Again, this is a new technology. It's being used to create deceitful images, kind of like deep fakes are now, thanks to AI. I mentioned previously the Cottingley fairies, which are photographs of little fairies in a garden, which took in a lot of people. Like even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thought, "Oh my God, these are real pictures of fairies." No, it was just trick photography. It was just like little tiny dolls, a macro lens, like and other tricks. Right? It was not real. Um, Now it's funny that I mentioned deepfakes. I don't know if my phone listens to what I say or not, or knows I'm teaching this class. But whenever I go on Facebook, half my Facebook reels are AI generated videos of like cryptids or ghosts or UFOs, and it is so annoying. It's just so annoying. But anyway, if ghosts are supernatural or non-physical, then how could a camera capture them? Cameras capture light. Light is the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic radiation is physical. Why should ghosts be able to physically affect a camera when they don't physically affect the human eyes, it seems, or at least not to the same extent? Probably don't have much time to discuss this, but I'll leave you with that question. If you want to go ghost hunting, you might also use an EMF meter. This one is available from ghoststop.com. That's not an ad, and I don't think you should go spend your money on this unless you're an electrician or something, because that's what this is actually for. These EMF meters or electromagnetic field meters measure ambient electromagnetic fields. These fields are all around us. Any place that's got electricity has ambient electromagnetic fields. These detect such fields. And the idea is that ghosts might affect electromagnetic field meters. So they're sometimes seen in these ghost hunting programs. But again, if ghosts are non-physical, how can we detect their presence by measuring physical phenomena? Kind of doesn't really make sense. Um, you might opt for a less technological means of ghost hunting, like these dowsing rods. So I mentioned these earlier. These are the L-shaped ones, and you can buy them on Etsy, or you can make your own out of some old coat hangers. These you tend to see, I think, in on the paranormal investigator content, you tend to see the L rods or pendula, like with a little crystal or a stone hung from a chain that swings maybe this way for yes and this way for no, or it can point you where to go if you're looking for something. But as we discussed earlier, as with the Ouija board, this is probably a case of the ideomotor effect. Um, Again, some of these ghost hunting programs will bring in a medium or a psychic or something to try and communicate with the dead. And there are problems with that as well. Obvious, I think, which are obvious given what we have discussed today. You might use a spirit box if you want to go ghost hunting. What is a spirit box? It's basically a radio scanner, and it scans multiple frequencies simultaneously, and you might hear a message, right? It might be scanning things, and maybe then you hear words, right? Which are just kind of like bits of different radio broadcasts that are being picked up. Maybe it's the ghost selecting those channels, affecting this device in order to send a message. Rather like you know how like when you get a mysterious letter from somebody who you don't know, like you see this in movies sometimes where each letter is cut out of a magazine and it's all in different sizes and fonts and you make a message that way. That's kind of like what a spirit box does with radio signals. The problem is pareidolia and apophenia. So pareidolia is again, it's mistaking noise for signal. So meaningful signal and meaningless noise. And apophenia, the perception of a connection or a relationship between things that are actually unrelated. Why do our brains do this? Well, because it's benefited us in our survival. Um, we have brains that have quite literally evolved to be wired in a way that we detect other living things and other things with minds, right? Think back to Yench, right? The problem is our brains are so good at this that they often see such things when they aren't there because it's better to have a false positive than a false negative, evolutionarily speaking. That explains the role of pareidolia and apophenia here. You might also decide to search for EVPs or electric voice phenomena. So these are the voices we hear in recordings that we can't hear when the recording is being made. For this, you would need a fancy recorder like this one. Again, don't buy it from Ghost Stop. Buy it from like a real store. There are some people over in linguistics and in CogSci who use this type of recorder. You might also use this type of recorder if you're trying to obtain audio samples, like if you're a musician. But the idea of using it in ghost hunting is just to record the ambient noise, listen back to it, and see if you hear some kind of attempted ghost communication. Again, probably pareidolia or apophenia is a pretty good naturalistic and parsimonious explanation of these EVPs. And again, if ghosts are supposed to be non-physical, how is it that they're affecting physical recording devices, right? Or if they are physical, then why can this hear them and I cannot, right? Lots of questions that remain unanswered. I know we've talked mostly about mediumship and very little about ghost hunting. Should you go ghost hunting? An interesting ethical question. Ought one hunt for ghosts? I say knock yourself out. I say have fun with it, right? In fact, there's a very big industry called dark tourism where people go on haunted walks or visit haunted locations. There are lots of these locations in Ottawa, like the Chateau Laurier, the jail, the old jail, which and the courthouse in Arts Court in downtown Ottawa, which I worked at for a bit for the animation festival. I had some coworkers who claimed that if you go into the basement, you'll get creeped out because it's spooky and haunted down there. But I didn't feel anything. Although it was interesting because they still have the old jail cells down there in the courthouse. But yeah, there are haunted walks all over Ottawa. I spoke with Professor Hilary Becker a few years ago about this. He's a professor. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he a business professor who studies dark tourism. He went down to New Orleans and did some dark tourism there. And he got to see, all of the old, places where the old voodoo queens and priestesses would work. Very neat. This stuff can be fun, but just don't expect to find anything that's really supernatural or paranormal. You might have an anomalous experience, which might be interesting. But I don't think there's a supernatural explanation. That's my personal opinion. I don't think there's a supernatural explanation for such things. Um, Spend your money on a haunted walk or a ghost tour or going to a frightening place. But don't spend too much of your money on it. Definitely don't spend money on people who claim to be able to speak with the dead. That's my personal advice. And you notice, yeah, speaking of dark tourism, all these shows, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, etc., they're always at a place where there already is tourism. An old hotel, right? That people stay at. An old hospital that people can go on haunted walks in. It's to encourage tourism. That's what this stuff is really about. I know that might sound cynical, but okay, we're actually out of time. Um, we don't have to read through all of this. I just think, look, there are some people who earnestly believe this stuff and who really think that they are putting people in touch with deceased loved ones. I still don't think you should give them your money. There are also evil people out there. There are grifters. There are con artists. Um, and the idea of communicating with somebody you love that has died is super compelling, and there are people that will take advantage of that. So whatever you believe, just be careful of that. Maybe this is why the Rhines didn't concern themselves with questions of life after death, right? Oh yeah, Teresa Caputo. She's just ridiculous. I okay, that's all I'm going to say about her. She's ridiculous. But you can watch video. You just go and watch videos of these psychics, of these ghost hunters. Watch out for some of the little tricks of the trade that I've told you about, especially cold reading, hot reading. Look at the devices that the ghost hunters are using and ask yourself why they're using that tool for that job. Is it the right tool for that job? Yeah. Just be careful how you spend your hard-earned cash, everybody. You're all able to believe what you want to believe, but don't be taken advantage of. That's all I'm saying. Next time, astrology and horoscopes. Very cool. We're getting into the space unit. Yeah, we have astrology and horoscopes on Monday and aliens and UFOs on Wednesday. I've already uploaded the readings, but I'm also going to upload a couple of episodes of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, circa 1980, the most widely viewed documentary series I think there ever was. And rightly so. It's very good. For astrology, we're going to watch episode 3. And then for aliens and UFOs, we're going to watch, I forget the episode number. I think it's 8. But you'll want to watch those 2 episodes because Sagan is just such an effective science communicator that I think we could all learn from him. I will have those episodes uploaded for tomorrow, but the readings are there now. All right, that's all I really have for you today. Maybe if you want to ask me more about this material, like, what do I think of Long Island Medium, or what do I think of this or that? Um, Discord server would be a great place to get some discussion going there. So, yeah, maybe if somebody reminds me, I'll share more thoughts on the server. But I guess this is it for now. So thanks everybody. We've actually gone over time for today, so sorry about that. I will see you all next Monday. So have a good rest of your week and have a good weekend. And I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.